Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's special event, Portfolio Prioritization Tips and Tricks with Microsoft Project Online. My name is Steve Tabadji from Wicresoft, Microsoft's 2019 Global PPM Partner of the Year. We will be telling you more about Wicresoft in a moment, but before we get started, we have a few quick logistical items to cover with you. During today's webinar, attendees will be on mute, and the line will not be open for questions. However, please do feel free to use the GoToWebinar question feature to submit your questions. We will address those questions during the webinar and will respond via email if we do not get to your specific question. If for some reason you get distracted or pulled away from the webinar, no need to worry, as we will be emailing both a set of detailed slides and a link to the presentation recording once it has been posted to our YouTube channel. And with that, let's get started. Wicresoft is pleased to present today's Tips and Tricks webinar. At Wicresoft, we help organizations of all sizes to evaluate, adopt, implement, and support project and portfolio management solutions built on the Microsoft Cloud. At the end of today's demonstration, we'll provide you with the links and email addresses that you can use to learn more or contact us if you're in need of further assistance. Since today's webinar is more of a how-to session as opposed to a why or what presentation, I have just 2 slides to share before we start the demo. In today's world, many businesses need to assess the impact of COVID-19 related initiatives to their in-flight 2020 portfolio of projects. Microsoft Project Online helps managers make informed decisions by using a built-in portfolio analysis tool. That will be the focus of today's demonstration. Organizations should use this tool to evaluate the impact of incoming initiatives against the active in-flight portfolio of projects, or to assess the impact and feasibility of new portfolios. In both instances, managers can use the tool to determine a portfolio of projects that maximizes value given cost and current resource availability. Managers can adjust these constraints throughout the process to evaluate how additional funding or resources might improve business outcomes and alter the set of selected projects. This kind of visualized what-if analysis gives portfolio managers and PMOs an objective format for evaluating project proposals, as well as the ability to run any number of alternative scenarios to compare different approaches. Power BI takes Microsoft PPM data to the next level with visualized dashboards and reports that enable project teams to see data in new ways. Microsoft offers a content pack that integrates Project Online and Power BI for out-of-the-box reporting. Wicresoft also offers additional reporting packs with richer and more comprehensive customized reports that we'll show to you today. With that said, I'd like to introduce my colleague Doug Welsby, who will be leading the demonstration and presentation from here. Doug?
Great, thanks, Steve. And I am now showing my screen. The demonstration slide should be coming up. Just want to double check with you that you can see that demonstration slide okay?
Yes, we see it.
Great, thanks. All right, so during the demonstration, and as Steve mentioned, the hands-on walkthrough today, I'll be walking you through how to use Project Online for doing prioritization of a selection or a portfolio of projects, new requests, and also doing reprioritization of existing projects that are perhaps in flight within your organization. I'll illustrate and walk through with you how we can first define our organization's business strategy, how we can input new demands and collect information about those projects and those proposals, and then how we go through a portfolio prioritization, including cost constraint analysis and resource constraint analysis throughout that portfolio lifecycle. So this is a fairly busy slide, but it's showing effectively the workings of how the Microsoft Project Online prioritization tool allows you to take projects and proposals through a full end-to-end lifecycle from new demand that's been input through to a final selected project portfolio for delivery. Now this and a number of other slides will be included in the deck that we'll mail out in the presentation materials after the webinar is over. But I just wanted to cover this one off to help with an understanding of how we first use this tool for inputting and creating demand, doing an initial portfolio prioritization based on some of the information and the metrics we're collecting about those projects. Then we can use the tool to go through a cost constraint analysis and then a resource constraint analysis, essentially assessing whether or not we have enough funding, enough budgets, and or enough resources, personnel, in order to deliver on this proposed portfolio before arriving with a final selected project portfolio. Now, there's a number of working parts in this tool set and in this implementation. I'll walk you through a high-level overview of how this works today, but essentially this is the workflow that this tool uses, that Project Online's prioritization capabilities uses for delivery of a portfolio selection methodology. We define strategic business drivers. We collect business information to allow us to do an initial prioritization using both out-of-the-box capabilities of the solution, custom fields that we may add into the tool in order to collect, gather, and use additional attributes for prioritization. And then finally, we can take this through, as I mentioned earlier, 2 steps of constraint analysis, both cost or budget and resource constraint analysis. Now, you don't have to do both. You can just use the tool for cost constraint analysis or resource constraint analysis, one or the other, or you could simply use the tool for reviewing project priorities based on some of the strategic drivers that we've added, these projects' impact on those strategic drivers, and or other custom fields that you've chosen. So you might go with that blue line for prioritization. You might layer in the green functional areas here for cost constraint analysis, or what's showing in gold for resource constraint analysis as well. So all of that's functionality available within the tool. So let me take you through how we can do that with this overall solution. So I've opened up a demonstration environment. This is pre-populated with a number of projects visible within the Solution Project Center. Many of you on the phone have already had exposure to Project Online, have used this tool in the past. So you're seeing here a list of projects, some of which are in an approved and in-flight stage, others which are newly proposed within the solution. And of course, because we have workflow and status and capabilities within the solution to categorize the projects, I could very quickly modify this view and switch to an alternative view, just showing, as an example, projects that are in early workflow phases where we're doing proposals and selection by department. So the information technology and the product development department have some newly proposed projects we're thinking about delivering, others which are currently going through a selection process where we're doing prioritization, essentially allowing us to very quickly drill in and examine the status of these projects within the solution based on the criteria that we've added. Now, that proposals by department view is only one way of considering and examining the information within the solution. There's other ways to expose that data as we are submitting new requests, examining the information that the requester has submitted about those proposals, and considering the cost versus benefits question as to which of these projects make the most business sense for us to deliver. So this is a sample Power BI report where we can very quickly go in and, for example, examine the data here and say, I only want to see my security focused projects and perhaps those that have a cloud computing impact. And then later on, maybe I want to filter that to show only the projects that have been deemed to be critical. So we have interactive dashboards, the ability to very quickly show a report of the project proposals that matter to me, matter to the executive or someone who's reviewing this, and then to drill down and look at information such as cost versus benefits by the type of project, and essentially perform an assessment of the overall proposed portfolio that's being suggested for this organization to consider. Now, back in this tool, if I drill into one of the existing projects, for example, this employee reporting portal project, you'll see here that this particular project has already gone through an assessment and it's currently in the execution stage. So we're showing a high-level workflow status, it's being delivered and executed on, and how did we get to that stage? Well, within the tool, we've configured some business case information. So we've allowed for the entry of a problem statement, some expected benefits, anticipated costs and benefits for this particular project, and calculated a return on investment. So high-level business case details that you may already be collecting in a Word-based or an Excel-based system, maybe a SharePoint list. But of course, we can gather that information directly here within the Project Online environment. And then the submitter has also been asked to submit a project strategic impact statement. So in this view, we are measuring the impact of this particular project on expanding into new markets, improving customer satisfaction, other measures that we need to assess in order to make some decisions as to whether or not this particular project makes sense to the organization. Now, these business drivers are yours. They're not something that comes with Project Online. They're the strategic business decisions, or drivers rather, that your organization has settled on as a means and a way of measuring the impact of these potential projects on the things that matter to your business. Are you attempting to grow into new markets? Are you attempting to tackle, for example, a customer satisfaction issue that you're faced with this year? Are you attempting to reduce expense bases and you want projects that are going to have an impact on that? So these strategic business drivers are less about the technology and more about the business. What are those drivers? Your directors and divisional leads will know and understand that. And then how would you determine the impact of one of those drivers based on this project's deliverables? So we see here that, for example, we have rating criteria: low, moderate, strong, extreme. All of these are configurable within the tool. So let's take a look at how to build this out, how to build out that driver library, add those criteria for a selection process, and then go through a ranking and prioritization of these prior to doing an actual portfolio analysis. So if I change over to the strategy area of the solution and we look at the driver library, within this area, you'll see that we have several different business drivers that we've identified. Again, these come from the business. Why are you coming to work every day? And what are you investing in? What are your key objectives for the organization? So perhaps you're attempting to expand the business into new markets and segments. So if I look at this driver, we have an opportunity here to give it a name, a description for this driver. We can limit the use of this driver to different departments within the organization. And this is an interesting criteria. Expanding into new markets and segments is likely a focus area for new product development, not likely for information technology. Likewise, if we are reducing an expense base for the organization, maybe every single department has to play their part and wants to be able to determine the impact of a project on that key objective of reducing the expense base. So we can limit the departments that use or even see that particular impact statement. And then lower down on the screen, we see that we have our choice boxes: none, low, moderate, and we're asked to provide a description for each one of those. So a project is said to have a low impact on this particular business driver if it grows revenue from new markets by up to $500,000. A moderate impact if it grows revenue between $500,000 and $1 million, etc. So these are just the basic descriptors for those business drivers. In this collection of business drivers, I added a new one this morning just in response to some of the ongoing and recent situations with layoffs, furloughs, the business reality today with the ongoing pandemic that we're all faced with. And so employee satisfaction as you are returning to the workplace is going to be critical to focus on and pay attention to. So you might want to add a business driver of improving employee satisfaction, delivering on projects that may have an impact on that particular business objective for your organization. So how do you measure that? Maybe you want to increase your retention rate by up to 2 points or by up to 2 to 3 points. That's low, moderate, or perhaps strong if you're reaching up to 5 points. Now, this brings up another key item here, increasing the retention rate of your employees. This is a business objective. We're attempting to assess whether or not our projects are going to have an impact on that particular business driver. But this tool, Project Online, does not natively offer you a way to measure that, of course. How do you measure employee satisfaction today? How do you measure customer satisfaction today? Those are all considerations that continue. You still need those measurement tools to assess whether or not you are actually, for example, reducing your expenses within the organization. This tool's focus instead, though, is to allow you to measure whether or not a project will properly impact those. And if it does, then that particular project may be one of the projects that makes the cut, that gets selected as you go through a driver prioritization. So don't mix up measurement of goals and achievability of those with the impact that these projects may bring and may have on those particular business drivers. Now, the next step as we go through this is to complete what's called a driver prioritization. Now, the tool allows you to input different business drivers and then weight them one against each other so that, as you'll see on screen, we are attempting to reduce the expense base, improve customer sat, etc. And we've given a prioritization or a weighting to each one of those. So if a project is proposed and has a very, very strong impact on increasing the market share in existing markets, it may not float to the top of your list because that particular business driver is only weighted at 7% of this particular portfolio and the decisions that the COO made on their prioritization of their organizational units, business proposals, and projects that are in the tool. So it's important to understand that they are all weighted. We can assess the impact of each one of those, and also that each one of the organizational units within your business can have their own driver prioritization. So the CIO might work through a prioritization. The COO might work through a prioritization. Maybe we have one for, as an example, for our human resources organization as well. They may be focused on projects that will have an impact on their key business drivers and priorities, which is perhaps customer or employee satisfaction. And then finally, you might end up with, for example, an executive consensus. They all agree to disagree on certain areas. And in the end, the executive consensus is the focus for the organization. So I'll walk you through quickly how to build out one of these prioritizations. And in the interest of what we're focused on today, prioritization in today's challenging market, I'm going to go through and add a new business driver prioritization called business recovery. I can give it a description if I wish. Again, I could focus this particular prioritization on certain business units if we wish. But in this case, I'll allow everyone to use this as a prioritization. And what we're interested in doing is not expanding into new markets, but we want to improve our existing customer satisfaction. We're focused in on improving employee satisfaction within the organization, and we want to reduce our expense base. Now let's just take a quick look at these available drivers and the selected drivers. Again, we're recovering our business post-pandemic. We're trying to get back to work. And some of our key objectives are to improve customer sat, improve employee satisfaction, and reduce our expense base. It's not expand into new markets or increase our market share. We're just trying to survive today. So this is one approach that we could take for improving this business recovery in this process. So the next step is I'll go through and do a prioritization within the tool. And this prioritization uses an approach called pairwise comparison. So with the tool, we now need to say, how important is improving customer satisfaction compared to improving employee satisfaction? Well, although we love our employees, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say customer satisfaction is more important than employee satisfaction. So how about improving customer sat compared to reducing the expense base? Well, in this case, I'm going to say that it's less important. We really want happy customers. We do need to reduce our expense bases, but given one versus the other, it's improved customer satisfaction. So my next step is then to go through this pairwise comparison and assess the next level in this tool or in this particular business driver prioritization. So what's improve employee satisfaction compared to reducing the expense base? Well, how about if I do this? I'm going to say they're equally important. We want to improve employee sat and we want to reduce our expense base. Good enough. Let's move on and I'll review the priorities, and you'll see there's a bit of a problem that occurs within the tool. We have what's called an inconsistency in our rankings. And the tool itself provides you functionality to allow you to examine the consistency of our rankings. So as an example, if I said A was more important than B, B was more important than C, and C is more important than A, well, you'll see we have a bit of a challenge or an issue with our logic. So we have a problem here. We're inconsistent in how we're ranking this. And you'll recall a moment ago, I said that improving employee sat is as important as reducing the expense base. So that's a bit of a challenge. So the tool won't forbid you from doing this. We can leave it the way it is, but we're better off to get that consistency ratio over into the green. And this is here because in this simple example with only 3 drivers, it's fairly easy to get your eye on where the problem is. But if you had 8 or 10 different drivers and you only had subtle differences in how they were ranked, you might quickly come into a bit of a loop or a logic problem, and that consistency ratio measure will help you with that. So I'm okay with this. And if I flip through to the second comparison where I'm saying improve employee satisfaction is as important as reduce expense base, I'm going to actually say it's less important than that particular priority. I'll review my priorities now. And when we finish this analysis, you'll now see that the consistency ratio has turned from red to green. We're now better off. We've got a better vision of the importance of one driver compared to the other. So we see our different driver names. We see those priorities as we've ranked them, and we've used this tool for this priority definition and the weighting. Now, by the way, you can compare these to each other and weight them manually if you wanted. Maybe reduce expense base is 50%, customer sat and employee sat are 25% each, but this pairwise comparison tool does allow you to ask those questions and do a more precise comparison of the differences between those business drivers. Okay, so we're done now. We have a driver library that we've built out. We have some driver prioritizations, including that business recover prioritization that I've identified here. And we're ready to go through now and do some portfolio analysis. Now that seems like a lot of work, and those steps that we just stepped through in order to get to this stage of now doing a portfolio analysis. But don't forget, building out that business driver library, doing those prioritizations, those are typically exercises that only happen annually or maybe biannually. It's not something that your general project manager or anyone else would be involved in. The project management office would lead that exercise. They would work with company executives and decision makers around those business drivers and walk through that prioritization exercise with them. But once that's completed, the information's in the tool and we are good to go with doing a portfolio analysis and deriving a solution for making some decisions around which projects get delivered. So let's take a look at a portfolio analysis. There's several steps required in order to create one of these, and I've gone through and sketched out a high-level major proposals analysis for fiscal year 20 and put this into the tool already in order to save us some time during the demo. So we've done a little cooking show pre-work here, and I've already put the cake in the oven, if you would. We're going to pull that out and we're going to look at the final results in a few moments. But here's some of the ingredients that go into creating one of these portfolio analysis. So the steps are fairly simple. We give it a name and potentially a description. We may limit some of this analysis to specific departments. In the prioritization type, here's where we can say we want to use the CIO prioritization or maybe that business recovery prioritization that we just created. And again, that is what controls the weighting and the metrics of those different drivers that we've created in the business driver and how they have been prioritized one against each other. I've selected 13 different projects for this particular analysis. The tool allows you to very quickly go through and see a selection of project names and add them to this portfolio analysis for consideration. And then we have some other information we add to the tool with regards to which custom field we're using for comparing costs and which fields and timelines we're using for comparing resources as we do that cost constraint and resource constraint analysis with the tool. And then finally, you'll see a few steps from now that we can force projects in and force them out of the analysis. And that's a frequently asked question. We're going to allow the tool to go through and do a cost constraint analysis for us and make some decisions based on the raw numbers. But the question always comes up, can we force something in or force it out? The CEO said, just do it, or never mind that project. And the answer is yes, we can go through and make those decisions to force things out in or force them out. So here's our prioritization. We have that list of projects on the left. We have the business drivers along the top. And if you'll recall back a few moments ago when I showed you the sample project that we had submitted in the tool, we had completed the strategic business drivers page as part of the submission process for that. So that's where this information is coming from. A moderate impact, a strong impact, low impact, etc. These are the impact statements and the assessment of the impact of each one of these projects on those strategic business drivers. So the next step then is to review our priorities. So based on the weighting and importance of each one of those drivers, and based on the impact that each one of these projects is said to have on each one of those strategic drivers, here is our weighted list of prioritized projects. So this Wellington 4D imaging software initiative is said to be the highest priority, representing 13% of the strategic value of this portfolio. And way down near the bottom, we have another one. It has roughly 3% of the strategic value within this portfolio. So if we deliver all of these projects, if we have enough money and enough resources to do so, we're said to be able to gather and deliver on 100% of the strategic value within the portfolio. But as you'll see now, we're going to step through an exercise where we're going to reprioritize this based on cost constraints and then based on resource constraints. So a lot of information on this screen. I'll start by highlighting that this is a list of selected projects. If we deliver all of them, we're said to be able to deliver on 100% of the strategic value in this portfolio. Total cost for this portfolio is a little over $3 million, and we're anticipating seeing $20 million in benefits by delivering all of these projects. So what if we don't have $3 million? What if we need to limit the amount of money we're going to invest in projects and reduce that? So I've already created that portfolio just by changing that total budget, and I'll open that portfolio selection up now. I've limited that budget or constrained my costs to $2.25 million. And what the tool did was it moved out approximately $853,000 worth of projects, essentially limiting my spend to just under that constraint limit that I've entered. Now, it doesn't just start with the most important project and work its way down until we're out of money. The tool attempts to find the best fit by maximizing the strategic value of this portfolio and moving projects out to respect that constraint, but at the same time, try and keep this number as high as possible. So you'll see here's a project, the Bradford Solid Material Laser Project. That project was moved out, but it's actually possesses or it has a higher strategic value than a couple of projects that stayed in the analysis. And that's just simply because of the cost, and we got more value by keeping those two in and moving that one project out within this particular analysis. So what if we don't have 2.25? What if we only had $1.75 million? So I'll change that proposal limit. I'll recalculate my portfolio and we'll see what happens. So when I've done that, we're now constrained to 1.75. You'll see here that our proposal costs are just under that limit. I've moved out a couple of additional projects to allow for that proper selection, to allow for that cost constraint to be respected. And we're now down to a strategic value of 72%. So recalling that we had just over 3 million in the initial proposed portfolio, and we're now down to 1.75 million as our cost constraint, we're doing pretty well. We have roughly 73% strategic value in the portfolio still, with what's that, just a little over half of the money, 1.5 to, we've actually 1.75 million dollars in this portfolio. So the tool's made some good decisions for us, and you'll notice again that in some cases, some fairly high value projects have been moved out, whereas others have been kept in within the portfolio. Now, finally, I'll show you that we can override this selection. Maybe I want to do something like this. I want to go through and say, this project, forget it. We're going to force it out. It's non-strategic. And maybe this project, we're going to force it in because it's a compliance-related project. Now, those rationale for forcing in or forcing out are configurable within the solution. Maybe it's a legal requirement. You might just want to type in that the CEO said just do it. There's lots of reasons why you'll force projects in or out, and you can capture those as you go through a strategic alignment within this tool. So if I recalculate this analysis, you'll see that that force in and force out has taken effect. You'll also note that we did not change the cost constraint, but our strategic value has dropped down from 70% and change to 66%. So we're less effective having overridden that force in, force out, with force in and force out, having overridden what the tool was trying to determine just purely based on the metrics without any override within the tool. And so then finally, if I wanted to, I could save this portfolio. And if I save this, I might call it the FY20 $1.75 million scenario. And I might say with force in, force out. So I've now saved that scenario, and the reason I did that is because we can subsequently go through and look at a comparison of those different scenarios and how they all align with each other. So here's our baseline scenario with 13 projects selected, and we see the strategic value and the proposal costs for that. And you'll see those other two scenarios we created along with the number of projects, their strategic value, and those proposal costs. In this chart on the bottom, where there's projects that are frequently not selected, those grade projects that are not selected in either one of those proposed scenarios, those are the projects that don't make a lot of business sense for this organization. Those are the ones we should have our eye on as projects that won't be selected in these scenarios and maybe should be examined in the future for delivery if we have more money or more personnel, but we might also want to examine the priority of those and whether or not they actually bring value to the organization. Now I'll switch back to the $2.25 million scenario. We've got that much money. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to go through and do a resource analysis now. We've wrapped up our cost constraint analysis and decided on a portfolio of projects that we're going to deliver if we have $2.25 million in costs. Now we're going to examine the available resources that are required for this portfolio of projects and make a determination of which ones we have enough staff for, which ones we don't have enough staff for, and then force some projects in or force them out and have other ways of addressing the resource shortage within this tool or within this scenario. So the way the tool works here in the Analyze Resources area is it picks the most important project and tries to find available staff. If it can, it makes the cut. It then tries to find staff for the next available project or the next most important project based on that priority metric. Subsequently, the third and fourth, and finally it starts getting to projects that it cannot staff. We just don't have enough staff. Now, you might end up with one of these projects with a very low priority that does make the cut just because it has very low resource requirements. So you'll sometimes have some very important projects that have been selected and some that are not so important, but that's simply because you had sufficient resources for them. So what are those resource requirements? Well, the tool tells us that, and the tool helps us to understand why some of those projects made the cut and some of them did not make the cut. Now, this timeline we're looking at, this window of resource availability, goes from January through to December for 2020. That's one of the configuration items that we set up when we define the properties for this portfolio prioritization. We're looking at this calendar year, January to December only. And we see the roles in the top half of the screen along with red highlighting on specific periods because of resource shortages. So we're left with 0 accountants for most of the year. We have some analyst roles, 1.4 FTEs for the month of February left over, but that was not sufficient to fill some of the resource requirements for the projects that have been proposed. In the lower half of the screen, we see some of the projects that have been selected. These are the ones that made the cut, and there's 4 of them. And we see projects that were not selected. And they weren't selected because of that resource shortage that I mentioned a moment ago. So for example, if we look at this agriculture monitoring system, we'll see if we have a requirement for an accountant and an analyst in that particular project. And if we focus in on the time frame of March, we'll see that we need 2 analysts and 0.3 of an FTE for that accountant, and we do not have sufficient accountant or analyst resource available for us within that particular period. So that's the rationale behind why those projects are not selected. We're short on resources. Let's do something about it. So if I switch back to the Gantt chart view, there's effectively three different ways that we can address this problem. The first and the simplest way is we can force one of these or multiple of these projects into the scenario. I could say that instead of being forced out, I want to change this from automatically being selected or not into forcing it in the same fashion that we did when we did a cost constraint analysis. The other approach is we can reschedule some of these projects. So if we choose to move some of them out in time or move them ahead or back, by rescheduling them, we can make room within that schedule to account for resource availability. This particular project, the release campaign, looks like a likely candidate that we could slide into the later part of the year, thus permitting the delivery of that based on available resources or other projects that are not being delivered. And then the final way that we can tackle this is, just as many organizations do, we could go out and hire resources. Now that might be FTEs, it might be contract employees, but regardless, we could bring staff in to help us with this assessment. The interesting part about this hire resources approach is if I just say, let's try and hire 2 people and recalculate this portfolio, you'll notice that I did not need to identify the type of resource that I want to hire. The tool is going to provide us a report that shows us that in order to deliver on the Bell Linguistics and the release campaign projects, both of those were moved into this selection portfolio. We need to hire a specific type of resource. And so if I change to this hired resources report, I proposed hiring 2 additional resources to facilitate delivery of this portfolio. And the tool tells us that if I bring in an accountant type resource and an analyst type resource, that will help us address the shortages for those 2 projects. And because we've outlined the estimated work for those resources in those projects, we have a blended rate estimate for the cost for them, we can see what the overall cost of adding those additional projects to this portfolio is. So if we like this selection or this portfolio of proposed projects, we have enough money for everything. We did not have enough resources for everything, but if we hire 2 resources, this is what the portfolio looks like. I can save this as my portfolio to deliver on, and then subsequent to that, I can go through and commit this portfolio, meaning now this is what we're going to deliver on. We've decided this is our portfolio of projects. We'll go ahead with those based on hiring 2 additional resources. And when I commit that portfolio, it will advance those projects through my workflow and carry on with the next subsequent steps in the workflow of delivery on those projects. So I've taken you through a very quick overview of how to use the Project Online tool for defining the business strategy for your organization, how new demands are input in the tool for gathering business case information and assessing the strategic impact of that particular project on the portfolio based on those business drivers. And then we've used the portfolio prioritization tool to do a cost constraint analysis and a resource constraint analysis. Now, there are quite a few technical details that we provided in there about items such as strategic impact drivers, pairwise comparison to do the weighting, all of the nuts and bolts of this prioritization. And many of you on the phone might not need to know the details of how that works. Those are, though, important steps for the PMO to work through as you consider using this for portfolio prioritization and tackle this important aspect of portfolio decision making, assessing new demands that have come in, and then making some decisions and doing what if analysis around whether or not you have sufficient resources available and sufficient budgets to deliver on that portfolio. So with that, I'll change presenter and I'll make Steve the presenter and move back to him, and we'll let Steve wrap up the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Can you see my screen?
I can. You're all good, Steve.
Great. As I mentioned during today's introduction, we'll be emailing a set of detailed slides along with a link to the recording of today's demonstration to all participants. To learn more, please visit either www.wicresoft.com or www.project-online.com. Contact information for Doug and myself is also enclosed. Thank you for your time and attention. We look forward to working with you in the future.